So today we're talking all about Tier 2. So how do we get our Tier 2 implementation to be efficient and effective? And I really think that it just comes back to data. So this morning I'm going to spend just a few minutes to kind of establish some common language in the room for a few different reasons, so that we're all kind of coming from this same perspective. But then I'm going to turn it over to my three wonderful school presenters here. We have Jess Beam from Middleton, West Middleton Middle School, elementary. Gosh, I always think it's a middle. Elementary. We have Andrew Bake from Valley View and Ashwaubenon. Go Pat Go. And then we have Melanie Meister from Wanakee. And the three of them are going to share kind of their stories, their learnings around the use of data and what it takes, and what has made it so that they are able to make better decisions on their Tier 2 team because of their use of data. I think that's about it. So we're going to just get started. Today's session really links to the TFI subscale on evaluation under Tier 2. So if you are using your Tier 2, or the TFI, you should be able to kind of drill down in your data and identify pinpoint areas for action. If you have not taken a TFI, or a tiered fidelity inventory, to kind of assess your implementation in the last 12 months, highly recommend that you do it. It really starts to actually look and see, where do we as a school need to improve our efforts? But then also, if you have multiple schools in your district, like we talked about that district leadership team, you can combine those scores and say, okay, where does our district leadership team need to put our support, okay? All right, so just to start off, right? The big trick we played on everybody with Tier 1 was that it was really about changing our adult behavior. And the same thing holds true with Tier 2 implementation. Like Tim Lewis said this morning, we all heard him say it, right? We cannot make students behave. And we actually can't force them to behave. But we can, as the adults, change our behavior to set the conditions so that it is easier for students to do the right thing and to participate in school and to follow the expectations. So the reality is the Tier 2 data portion and all of the implementation of Tier 2 still lies with us as the adults, right? We are the ones responsible for changing the behavior. While we can set up some great interventions that you will hear about, it's all about our own use of data and the use of those skills needed for implementation of the intervention. Last year, anybody was at the conference last year? Kent McIntosh was here, Dr. Kent McIntosh, and he may have shared an analogy he had heard from a principal one time. And the principal said, I used to think that implementing PBIS was like building a 3-tiered bookshelf. And if you see up here, I'm guessing this is, like a nice little IKEA bookshelf that took a little time to put together. And that once you kind of have the bottom portion on, you can kind of add on from there, right? Tier 1's in place, great. We can kind of set it to the side, and we can start to add on Tier 2, next bookshelf, right? And then once that's good, we can just kind of tap, tap, here, put a third bookshelf on. And then the principal said, you know what, Dr. McIntosh, the reality is implementing PBIS is a lot more like doing the laundry. Because as soon as your laundry is cleaned up, folded, nicely put away, you are back to this, right? And the reality is our decision-making process is kind of cyclical like that. And we can't kind of overly focus on Tier 2 without going back to Tier 1. And it is a constant fluctuation. And that can bring some frustration, but it can also bring some really nice excitement when we look to rejuvenate our efforts and continually move forward. So this is not my house, by the way. This is not my laundry. Although my living room may look like that sometimes. I like to believe that that's where I'm at. But the reality is our implementation probably looks like that a fraction of the time, if at all. But the way I think we get better at doing the laundry is through our use of data. It is imperative that your Tier 2 team is using and loving and excited about data. So how many of you would consider yourselves data nerds? Like you geek out on data, you have the ribbon that says, I heart data. Awesome. And how many of you might be slightly data phobic? Like, you don't have to admit to it, but like I might be a little nervous. Absolutely. Because it can be overwhelming. Because when your laundry looks like this and your data looks like that, It's a lot to kind of put together and fold. But you put on a nice movie and you get it done. Okay. So the other cool thing about implementing multiple tiers, and for those of you, many of you in the room have implemented both tiers 1 and 2, is that when we start to see implementation with Fidelity at both tier 1 and tier 2, we start to see some pretty dramatic results in our student outcome data. So if you pulled up my PowerPoint from the conference app or the website, this actually comes from our most recent evaluation brief that talks through some of the student outcome data that we are seeing statewide in Wisconsin as a result of your work in your schools implementing tier 1 and 2. You can see a pretty dramatic decline in student suspensions. I'm going to look at Michelle, but you can pull up that evaluation data and check it out. It's sliced and diced a few different ways. All right, so some of you were trained recently in PBIS and are familiar with kind of the idea that I have behind me, the tier 2 intervention features. And some of you were trained a while ago, and this might be fairly new. We have done a lot of learning. We've done our own internal continuous improvement process to determine what is it that's helping schools and what is getting too confusing. And this was one of the things that we have put at the forefront of our training now, is these 6 intervention features that really become the backbone of your intervention. So whatever interventions you choose, that you pick up or that you hear, Tim Lewis called them shiny things today, right? We have the short attention span. That's great. We're not saying don't do it, but be cautious and be careful implementers and make sure that these 6 features remain present. Today in this session, we're focusing on the 3 that have the most to do about data, right? Fidelity, progress monitoring, and using your entrance and exit criteria to make decisions. So you'll hear the presenters in a few minutes really hit home on those. The other more practice features around increase in teaching with opportunities to practice, increase in adult feedback, and increased homeschool connection, you can hear about in different sessions, and I'm sure you will throughout the rest of the next day and a half. But today we're going to focus on those 3 data ones to help improve our own skills and use of those. So entrance and exit criteria. When are we going to provide support, and how do we know when we can be done? When the student has received adequate support, they have built those skills to fluency, and they're ready to not be in an intervention anymore. The goal of a tier 2 intervention is not for them to stay on it forever. It's for them to be able to be faded off the intervention and be fully supported with just some really good differentiated tier 1 supports, okay? There's some other pointers on there you can click through later on and kind of help guide your team as you look through these points. Here's some examples. You have lots of data in your school that you can pull from. And you have to kind of weed the garden a little bit and say, where do we think we can have some good impact? And where is our most healthy sources of data that we can pull from and use? The one thing I do want to call your attention to is that at tier 2, we're thinking about the earliest indication of risk to provide supports. So you'll see some examples up there that might make your eyes, kind of go, oh, wow. 1 major would equal a tier 2 intervention. Well, that's a big deal. A major, if we've really well defined that, that's a big deal, okay? So we have to lower our entrance criteria so that we are catching students early and often enough so that we can actually provide that low-level support through tier 2. Here are some examples. We don't want students hanging out in tier 2 interventions for too long, right? 6 to 8 weeks, and then hopefully they've learned those skills to fluency and we can fade away or layer support if they need more from there. Fading is an often overlooked part of interventions. So we have to be a little bit more intentional rather than just saying, Michelle's been in check-in, check-out for 6 weeks. She's doing great, she's ready, she's made the progress. Thursday, hey, high five, Michelle, way to go. And then Friday, she gets nothing. So how do we kind of peel some of those layers of support back so that she can be successful, again, just with the core, with the universal supports? Progress monitoring, super critical. The daily progress report. Many of you may be using some form of a DPR or daily progress report, and you'll hear some of the schools highlight their work with that. But we have to understand what skills are we trying to target and how are those skills showing up in real time across that student's day in the natural environment. Without that, we really are only reliant upon many different voices and perceptions. So the progress monitoring kind of helps us keep focused on what is it that we're trying to make better and how is that showing up in the student's day. Swiss graph, so hopefully your data systems can kind of graph this data for you, and you can help triangulate some of it and make some decisions so that it's not, you also want to take a look at how is Emily doing, how is Jess doing, Andrew, Melanie, and Michelle, but then how are all of the students doing together in the aggregate? Does anybody know the response rate that we should see per intervention? 70% response rate. We want to see a nice, healthy response rate and monitor that as well as every individual child. Because if we don't have that response rate, we're putting our pennies, we're investing our time, our energy, our resources into something that might not be working very well. So, something to think about. A couple of examples that are linked within your PowerPoint. And the last one, Tim Lewis talked about this a little bit this morning in terms of the skill development needed for staff members to do this work. So the training and the ongoing support that is needed. Fidelity is often, I think, kind of past years have taught us that fidelity is about measurement, right? And it's about making sure, are people doing the right thing? But I think we need to back the truck up a little bit with our Tier 2 team and say, have we trained our staff members adequately to do this? And are we actually making this enough of a priority to follow up with some nice skill development? Okay? So keep that in mind, that fidelity and your support of staff members go hand in hand. And the 5 minutes at a staff meeting ain't gonna cut it, right? We have to keep the main thing, and keep this in the forefront of people's minds. Dedicated professional learning, ongoing coaching, opportunities for collaboration in PLCs, lots of different ways that this can happen, but it has to remain a priority because we are asking people to do something that they have never done before and don't have much practice with, or at least intentional practice, right? And especially collectively as a staff. So, Tier 2 interventions for a reference point. Here's kind of some things to think about. They have to include those features. The team needs to kind of oversee some of that work, and it's connected to Tier 1. Everything always comes back to that universal. The other thing, this is just as an artifact for you to take away, this is hyperlinked to what we're calling the Tier 2 intervention audit. So you can click on that and list out all of your interventions that you currently have, or maybe even thinking about using, and go through and have a conversation with your team about, are those features present, and does a team support this work? And if not, we have to do some thinking about what we're going to do to improve it, or do we need to just abandon it and be done? And maybe invest in some other interventions that we're more skilled in doing so far. The other thing I would highly suggest is making a flowchart for your decision making so that, we are all on the same page. Communication can get very muddied. Things can get a little sticky. And when our wires are going all over the place, staff members are confused. And if our staff members are confused, you can guarantee our students are confused. So as a Tier 2 team, is everybody crystal clear on how we make decisions and how we support our students? And then how do we communicate that with our staff and families so that we are providing a cohesive system of support for students? All right, so without further ado, I'm going to invite Jess up. And while she gets situated with the mic, I'm just going to end this real quick and pull up her PowerPoint.
Are you guys able to hear me? Is the mic working? No, the mic's not working. Talk louder. That's hard for me at times, but I will do my best. So welcome, everybody. I'm from West Middleton Elementary, and I noticed that my email was wrong up there, but Emily can get it to you. If you have any questions, please contact me. I will answer whatever you have questions for. Just a little bit about us. We're going to start the year with over 500 students this year. At the beginning of last year, we were at about 26% free and reduced. We have a Tier 1 team, which is a teacher rep from each grade level, along with a special ed teacher, our school counselor, myself, who practices like an assistant principal. We also then have our school social worker and our school psych, and is sometimes on tier 1 more with tier 2 pieces, and then we have like a behavior interventionist that's part of our tier 1. Our tier 2 team consists of, which is our SST team and our student services team, and then 2 classroom teachers. We had like a lower elementary and an upper elementary, but they've switched roles now, so we have 2 upper elementary, but we're going to rock and roll with it this year. The one piece I really want to bring everybody to is the importance of data collection. We use EduClimber, and it's a non-negotiable in our building. So this is the only way we know how students need more instruction when it comes to social emotional learning. So teachers and paras in our building are putting data in EduClimber. So they're writing up the majors and minors on a daily basis. And again, that's the only way that we know that students are needing supports. And so it's just that non-negotiable.
Can you speak up just a little bit? We're having a little.
Sure, like keep my head this way. How about I just try to hold it and have all the stuff in my hands here. I just want to bring us to this. This is what we created at the beginning of the year. As you saw, we were in our 7th year of Tier 1. Last year was my first year in the building, and then last year was our first year with Tier 2. And so at the beginning of the year, we created this, which is, Emily described it as your entrance and exit. We did in, on, out, because we needed to have some rules that the data would guide us of what are we doing when they're on Tier 2. And what do we need to be changing within our Tier 2 supports? And so we created this as a team. What works for our building is that when a student has 5 minors or 3 majors, that alerts the system, which alerts those of us looking at the data that the student is needing some supports to be put in place. And so that's kind of our rule, but that works for our building. It's different in other buildings. And then from there, we start with check in, check out. So when we have EduClimber, it's set up to send me alerts at 1 a.m. in the morning, and it tells me the students met the criteria, it hit the threshold, and that's when I know my job is to start check in, check out for those students. And so that's the first way that data is supporting the work that we do. From there, we are looking at that data weekly for those students who have hit that Tier 2. And so at about 2 weeks, we're looking at that data, and I'll talk a little bit about that here in the next slide. And so I'll just keep coming back to this slide within the next few minutes that I'm speaking. So I just wanted to share, the screenshots didn't get in. It's okay. So I wanted to share with you what they kind of looked like, but they're linked. And if you have any questions, Emily and I can get you the links. Not a big deal. So for our check and check out, we have our specials teachers that are the mentor for the students. And so like I said, EduClimber alerts me, and it's then our Tier 2, it's myself really that goes and works with the student on getting them started with check and check out. Sometimes the school psych's able to help me out. And so that's just our general, what we start with, and that I can get you that link. The goal is that the student is 80% on that daily progress report. And then it's just that teacher having that quick conversation with the student for check and check out after each class period. From there, though, what I'm really watching is the daily progress report, that 80%. And so after 2 weeks, if a student is not hitting that 80%, or if that student is hitting 80% or above, but then that teacher's still writing up minors or major behaviors in EduClimber, that's that key to me, like there's something that's needed that's we're missing. And so that's when we go to that modified check and check out. And that is, again, it's all guided by the data that we're collecting. And so we use that data and then conversations with that teacher on what does that modified check and check out need to look like. So the reports in EduClimber that I get, that's really defining, like, here's the problem areas that that student's struggling at, and here's how we need to modify that point sheet. And so it's just that data on EduClimber and the teacher response. So when a student has been on check and check out, at 4 to 6 weeks is where we're really looking at what are their daily progress reports telling us? Are there more minors or majors being written up in EduClimber? Does the student need more support? And so that's where then we make that decision of this student's still needing some more supports or some instruction. And that's where we developed, we call it SAG, instruction groups. And what we did was, these are our 3 areas that we developed because we used our EduClimber data over the year and a half that we had for data to kind of help us direct in the 3 areas that we felt were highest priority for our students. And we used second step boosters, skill streaming, and some curriculum from social thinking to really develop the lessons. And the key is that they're no more than 20 minutes long and that a student can join at any point. But the really key point here that I want you to understand is that we use data to define what group they're going into. And so EduClimber can break down for us these 3 areas, and then that defines for us what group does that student need to be put into for more instruction. So we're using the data from EduClimber to guide us as to what group the student needs to be put in. And then the other key is when a student is receiving this instruction, they're still on check and check out. And so they may have the general DPR that I have a link to, or they may have their modified check and check out, but they're still on check and check out, and we're still monitoring that data. And so that data is really guiding us in, like, how is the SEG instruction going for that individual? Is it working for them? Or are we still needing to look at maybe adding some more supports? So I think a key here is, why has it been successful for us? And a major piece of this is that it applies to all students, and that data has been a non-negotiable for our staff. And that's paras and teachers, that data has to be put into the system. In order for a student to get support, we have to have that data put in the system. And again, that it's teachers and paras. We did, I know this is always a question I get, yep, we got some pushback at the beginning of the year, but we just had to be consistent of, this is who we are, and this is how we're going to rock and roll. And it's a growing pain, but we all got through it, and it's wonderful now. And so that was just at the beginning, we really had to stick to our data rules. So when you look at that in, on, out, those were that data rules. Yes, I got those emails. I'm having problems with this student. Can you help me? Do you have data to support that? And then we'd go in, no, there had been no data. So you do have to stick to that you have to have that data to support your rules. And we are finally at a point where we're catching those students that are needing those supports. So it's not growing into a bigger problem, because we're using that data and catching them right away. That data is helping us support those students that are needing more instruction. You've heard me talk a little bit that we set up thresholds in EduClimber. So those thresholds then are emailed to me and to a few of the members on our Tier 2 team. And that's just alerting us then that your instruction's not working, the supports you have in place aren't working, you need to do more. And so that's how we are able to be able to catch students that are needing supports. And then again, once a week, we're meeting and looking at this data as a Tier 2 team. So it's not our entire Tier 2 team, it's just a few of us that are able to get together and look at that data on a weekly basis. We've set up an Excel sheet that's able to, like, the date that the student goes on check-in, check-out, and then we have it at their dates that we need to look at the data at 2, 4, 6, and then if it continues, then we continue monitoring that way, and that's just a way that we are able to track that. We are watching that data as the year goes on. And that we're really using that DPR data to layer supports. And so that's been key for us. And then just kind of what's next for us. We used our data to just really realize that we're not identifying those students with internalizing behaviors. So we've had lots of conversations with Emily of what does that data need to look like, because we're missing those students. They're out there and we're giving them supports, but it's not working. And so what does that data need to look like? And that's where we've really, like, our goal this year is to really look at making sure that we're putting in minor data and that we've developed some really tight rules around what's a minor. And that's really then going to help us define that data for those internalizers. And then also just layering more supports beyond check-in, check-out, and SAG. So our data is showing us that, okay, you have these kids in SAG, but this still isn't enough, but now what? And so that's our big work that's ahead of us this year. And that, again, we use that data to kind of guide us in that work.
Okay, good morning. My name is Andy Baek. I am the principal at Valley View Elementary School. A little bit about Valley View, in addition to the fact, as you can see in the picture, that we're very close to Lambeau Field, which is pretty exciting. A little bit of additional information about us. We have 720 students at Valley View in grades kindergarten through 5th grade. We have 2 sections of kindergarten and then either 6 or 7 sections of every other grade level. So we're a very large elementary school. Our free and reduced lunch is about 42%. Over the last several years, our populations of Black students and Hispanic students has really continued to increase, which is an exciting thing that we're really excited about. We also recognize, though, in the last year or so that we are really doing a pretty good job of meeting the needs of those students behaviorally, but some of our goals for this upcoming year is what we can do, what kind of practices we can change to better meet the needs of those students academically, because there are some gaps that we have been noticing, that we have some specific goals this year that we're going to work on with that. About our implementation, we implemented Tier 1 about 7 years ago in 2011, and then about 3 years ago, or 4 years ago in 2014, we implemented Tier 2. So it's been about 4 years since we've implemented our Tier 2 interventions. As was mentioned earlier, we do have 2 separate teams. We had a Tier 1 team that began our work with Tier 1, and we really wanted to ensure that when we added Tier 2 to our system, that we didn't allow the work of Tier 2 to take away from the work of Tier 1. So we ensured that we have that Tier 1 team that has remained consistent, and there's just a little bit of overlap as far as administrators and our school counselor on those 2 teams, but otherwise it's a completely separate team so that we are not kind of diluting the resources, or we're not taking that focus away from Tier 1, because we always want to ensure that that Tier 1 team remains really, really strong. A little bit about data. Whoops. So part of this slide is missing, which is fine. When we implemented Tier 2 PBIS, we used our current major and minor data set to set thresholds. So this is just kind of an example of, at the end of the year, as many of you perhaps have, we had those students that we recognized that we were clearly not meeting their needs. If we have students who have 25, 23, 20 majors and minors at the end of the year, we know that there's something we need to do different. And that was when we implemented our Tier 2 support. We did have to have many difficult conversations as we looked at this as far as why. What are the things that we're not doing well? What are the things that we need to add to our system to better meet the needs of those students? Another maybe thing to mention is that when we first started Tier 2, we used Swiss. And a couple years ago, we switched to EduClimber as they use. And one of the things that's really been beneficial for us, as she mentioned, is that you can set thresholds in EduClimber. So if your district uses EduClimber and you haven't set thresholds, it's something that I really, really recommend. It's something that we had to have our district level EduClimber person do for us. But as was mentioned earlier, what's so great about it is the fact that you can put in what your threshold is going to be. For us, it's 2 majors and 5 majors, or 2 majors or 5 minors in a 4-week period, and you automatically get those emails. Because we did have students who would kind of slip through the cracks. It would take us a while to get them when we had to go in and look for the data. This just ensures that you get that email, and that very next day you can be working on getting them started with check and check out. Again, as was mentioned earlier, this is what works for our school, and we had to have lots of conversations and really discuss what was going to work for our school. There really is that balance between you want to catch as many students as you possibly can, but we also wanted to make sure that we weren't diluting our resources so that all of our check and check out buddies were working with so many students that it wasn't a meaningful time. In the very beginning, we did have each of our check and check out people maybe working with 4 to 5 students, and we just felt that that was too much. In order to really have that meaningful one-on-one time, we've tried to really cap it at about 2 students that each one of our check and check out buddies works with, so that it really feels like that personal one-on-one time. So this is the kind of graphic that I'm sure we've all seen, almost like Tim Lewis said this morning. It has to be part of every presentation somewhere. Here it is in this one. And we're really going to focus in on the balanced assessment piece, which for us is data, and collaboration. And collaboration especially has been a huge part of our success. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about our collaboration. One of the things that's really important is that we have 3 different teams that collaborate as part of our Tier 2. And each of those teams kind of does different work, but it has the same goal, which is to ensure that our students are going to be success and that we're going to have those positive outcomes for them. So one of our teams that meets is our Tier 2 leadership team, which includes our 2 administrators. We have a principal and an associate principal, our school counselor, our school social worker, and our internal coach. And this team meets every 2 weeks on Tuesday mornings, and we talk about kind of our nitty-gritty details. We go into each student's data. We really talk specifically about that data, what's working for the student, what's not working for the student, and we spend a lot of time as well talking about kind of our systems. So for example, we might know that going into our next team meeting, which I'll talk about in a moment, there's going to be some questions that are going to come out. Or based on this data, there's going to be some things that teachers or others are going to be requesting of us. This gives us an opportunity to have those conversations before we go into that larger meeting, so that we kind of are on the same page and we've had those difficult conversations about what is the most logical next step, why is this next logical step, and we have those conversations in a smaller group before we go into that larger group setting. The other thing that's really helpful for us is that during this meeting, we also do our simple FBAs. We bring in some of the teachers who are working with that students, and we sit down and have those conversations, and we kind of come up with those more specific plans. One thing that Valley View does, which is a little bit different, I think, than what might be typical, is all of our students who meet the data will go immediately into check and check out. We only do a simple FBA when check and check out isn't effective, so that we can decide what our next step is going to be. So everyone automatically kind of funnels through check and check out, and then the next step is dependent on what we learn in this simple FBA. So that kind of is our every other week meeting. We also have a once monthly meeting, which is a really great collaboration time, which is all students who work at a specific grade level. For example, if we're talking about a first grade student, all first grade teachers, all counselors, all special education teachers, and then that Tier 2 team all sit down together for a collaboration meeting to talk about all the first grade students who we have academic or behavioral concerns about, or who we just feel could use some additional support. And that's another time where we talk about what this teacher is experiencing in the classroom? Do those observations match what the data says? It's kind of common sometimes, especially for a teacher who hasn't worked with check and check out before, for the data to look pretty good, many times because the teacher is kind of tiptoeing around, I don't want to take away too many points because I know that the student, that's how they think of taking away too many points, because I know the student is going to respond well, they're going to be upset, and we really have to have conversations about the importance of, we want to help the student recognize their behavior and recognize what is the behavior that's going to lead to their success and what are those behaviors that are getting in the way of some of their successes. And they can't do that unless we're giving them honest feedback and we're having good conversations about that. And so this is a good time where we have those conversations with those teachers about, is your data matching what you're seeing? Again, it's very common for teachers to say it just hasn't gone very well this last month, and we look at their data and they probably have gotten 95 to 100% of their points over the month. So then we have to have conversations about, why is that happening? What can we do differently to help support so that your data better matches the things that are happening in the classroom? This is where we talk about future steps. We talk about what things we think might be the next logical step, and then we, like it says up there, we have some problem solving as well. We really want to take all of the input that the teacher is giving us, but again, as has been said already, there has to be data that matches what is being said. Our last team that meets is once each quarter. We have all of our check and check out buddies, all of our interventionists meet just to have conversations about what they need or what's been working well for them. What we learned in the very beginning when we started Tier 2 is they kind of felt isolated a little bit because they weren't the teacher who was working each day with the students. They didn't always understand why students didn't receive all the points that they could have, and so they didn't feel like they could always have those meaningful conversations with them at the end of the day about how they can support the student or what kind of things the student can do. Obviously, students don't necessarily tell the check and check out buddy about their day or exactly what happened. So this is where we have those conversations so that we can better support our interventionists. One of the great things about EduClimber is that it also allows the interventionists to put in the data themselves. So this is also a great time for us to kind of just review with them what's been going well with entering that data, what are some things that you're having challenges with as well. Within the presentation or within the app, there's also a number of things that I've included in here, things such as what our point sheets look like. We also have a resource that we give to all classroom teachers when their student starts check and check out, even if it's something where they're a teacher who's done check and check out 50 times before. We review the expectations and kind of, these are the things that are good to remember as you start check and check out. So it's kind of like the teacher's quick guide to check and check out. So that's a resource that's there. Another thing that we have as part of the resources is we decided after a few years that for our older students, check and check out with 5 periods was enough feedback and it was giving them the information they needed. But for our younger students, that wasn't enough feedback. They needed more immediate feedback. So we changed so that we have 8 periods for our kindergartners, first and second graders, so that they're getting more immediate feedback, so they're hearing from their teacher more, so that they're sitting down and talking about their behavior more, so that those students are able to make the changes that we need. It just wasn't happening for us with the 5. Talking a little bit more about data, some of the resources from the PBIS network that have been really, really helpful for us are some of the things that have been talked about already. Self-assessment survey, we have our staff take this once a year, and that really gives us a great idea of what staff perceptions are of what's happening at Valley View. It kind of really points us in the right direction of staff feels like this is something that's working really, really well. This is an area that we need to get way better at, and that's good feedback for us to get every single year. The tiered fidelity inventory identifies how staff are applying the principles, and we can have good conversations about our perceptions matching what's actually being observed by our external coach who comes in and does observations, and by our team. Is there a good match there, or are there some gaps where we need to address or we need to make some changes? And then we also are constantly looking at that student outcome data. How are students responding to our universal things? How are students responding to our Tier 2 interventions? And by putting all these things together, we really feel like we are doing a good job of adjusting as we need to. I think that's another important thing, is that our system is always changing to meet the needs of our students. I think that we are constantly recognizing that based on different student needs, based on different ideas that we get at conferences like this, that we can make adjustments and better meet the needs of our students. As I mentioned, in that first year, we realized we made mistakes, and these are some of the big things that we noticed right off the bat, some things that maybe people who are newer to PBIS or to Tier 2 may also be noticing. One is that interventionists felt isolated from the results. So again, that was why we implemented that once a quarter meeting for our interventionists to really get an opportunity to sit down and talk with our team about what's working well, what's not. We recognized one size doesn't fit all, so that was why we changed our point sheet, our daily progress report, to have different amounts of time periods, and then also gave us the opportunity to change our follow-up intervention system. At first, we had every student got the regular check and check out, then they got the individualized check and check out, then they got the SAIG groups. Now we do that simple FBA, and their next step is dependent on what we feel their need is. Is it that there's a gap of understanding, that they aren't quite sure how to do the next thing, then they get the SAIG group. If it's more something where they just need a more specific, they need to hone in on certain skills, we do the individualized, so it kind of changes. Also mentioned too many students equal the lack of personal touch, which is why we tried to ensure we only had 2. One of the things I didn't mention too is we're really deliberate about who our check and check out buddies are. We want to ensure that they're the people who are going to give that student the positive reinforcement and the best possible outcome. So we only have check and check out buddies who volunteer and who really want to be. We don't want to have check and check out buddies who we are asking to do it, but they really don't want to do it because we know that we aren't going to get the outcomes that we are hoping for. So I have here, again, the resources that are available to you, and I also put my email address and my contact information. If you're interested in other resources that aren't down there, feel free to contact me. I'd be happy to share those with you. All right, thank you.
All right, can you guys hear me okay? My voice is a little crackly because I'm recovering from a cold, but I'm Melanie Meister. I'm a school psychologist, currently in my 8th year in the occupation, but my 2nd year in my current district. So I'm in Wanakee Community School District. I'm at 2 elementary schools, Arboretum and Heritage, but today I'm specifically talking about 1 Heritage Elementary School. So this is kind of a quick little overview of our school. We're growing rapidly. We're the only elementary school that actually has space to grow. So PBIS is going to be essential as we're gaining about 50 students a year. But you can kind of see when we started Tier 1 and Tier 2, we were the elementary school that was kind of spearheading it all. And so for a long time, we've got this. We've got this all figured out. Our system's good. And this year, we really started reviewing it, and we're like, okay, we need to go a little backwards. We need to get back to Tier 1, and we need to get back to Tier 2 and kind of fix some things. So I'll be talking about some of those processes that we did this last year. So when I came in as a school psychologist, I was kind of expected to be the data analyst. And so we also use EduClimber. So I set up the threshold based off what the school already had in place. And so I was getting automatic emails. And so I would use that to create the agenda. And then since I created the agenda, I was also facilitating our Tier 2 meetings. So what I realized is that, we had the 2 majors and 3 minors in 12 days. And just a side note, the reason we said 12 days is our specials run on a 6-day schedule. So it's basically like 2 school weeks. And then our team meets once every 6 days. So those were the thresholds I set up. You can see we had an attendance threshold because kids also got on like an attendance check and check out from that. We had the teacher request. And then we had other things like we had a mental health screener, parents could make requests, those kinds of things. So as the data person, I'm coming to the meetings with my agenda, got the kids on there that have met the threshold already. And then frequently I would be in there and the school counselor or the school principal or maybe even a teacher would be like, so just so you know, Mrs. Johnson kind of mentioned that Charlotte is needing some help too. And that happened at almost every single meeting. And it's like, so our thresholds clearly aren't meeting kids early enough because if we're getting teacher requests, that means we're probably exasperating teachers a little bit. They're using their toolbox, they're trying their best, and they're asking for support, and we're hoping that maybe they probably reached a frustrational moment as well. So we need to go backwards, serve more kids, and catch them earlier. So that was kind of my epiphany, like teacher request is standing out. But since I'm a psychologist, I wanted to know the data. So I decided to create a spreadsheet. Every row is a child that was accessing a tier 2 intervention, and then I put all those entrance criteria as our columns. And the green shows what they flagged on, basically. And as you can see, third column, teacher requests. So data supported my hunch, and I was like, okay, so I brought this to our team then, and I was like, you guys, you know, teachers are requesting it, and that's good. We want them to know that the team can help, and obviously they see value in our team, but we need to reach those kids earlier. So you can see we focused on those first two columns. Like, what are our data thresholds then? There's also a tier 1 piece to this all where teachers aren't writing up incidents as much as we would like. So our tier 1 team is also simultaneously working on training teachers to make sure they're entering data, making data easier to access, those kinds of things. So hopefully we're getting more data. But in the meantime, we needed to change our threshold because we weren't reaching enough students. So old ones got replaced by these. So you can see with our data, we just went to 1 major. In our district, 1 major is a uh-oh. So we don't get very many incidents. And so that was a big major flag for us. So then we also went to 2 minors, and you can see we took away like the 2 weeks, the school weeks, because we weren't meeting kids either that way. So we just left it as an open timeline. Summer work, so I had to turn this in before we did this work, but now it's done. So at the attendance, we used Attendance Works website, and we've now set up some attendance thresholds in EduClimber. So the first 2 months, if they meet a certain threshold of tardies or attendance, it flags. And then after the first 2 months of schools, we're monitoring a percentage. So if they're lower than a certain percentage, then they're flagging as well. And again, this is an email that's coming straight to me when it happens. We kept the teacher request. However, we tightened it up a little bit. So we didn't have any formal way to request. There was no formal request for assistance, as you might have heard in your PBIS training. So we tightened it up. So now there's actually a form that you have to fill out. You can't just go to the school counselor and say, hey, I need some help. But we're trying to be flexible. Okay, so you didn't enter a major or minor, but was there other data that you collected? So a lot of our teachers use Class Dojo. Show us your dojo data, or even show us how many times you had to contact this family, or those kinds of things, or how many times, not that I want to support this, but how many times the kid had to stay in for recess. Like, give us some tally data, give us something, because you're probably collecting it somewhat, and showing them that there's more data than the majors and minors. And then we also replaced our mental health screener with the SSIS-SEL coming this year. Sorry, that's a lot of acronyms. It's a social emotional learning screener where instead of saying, oh, a kid is at risk for an internalizing disorder or at risk for externalizing, now it's giving us specific social emotional domains that a kid might not be proficient in those skills. So it might say, this student or this group of students, they're needing some help in self-management, which is what we're finding most of our kids are being written up for, off-task behavior or physical aggression. So that's going to hopefully flag, that we're starting that this year, so that's going to hopefully flag like SAG groups or those kinds of things or stuff to focus on in our check and check out. So that's the entry criteria. So we're like, okay, we're feeling good about our entry criteria. That's coming up this year to try it all out and see if we're hitting more students. Okay, so let's look at our exit criteria then. So the first thing that we look at, we don't always use it efficiently, but something we do look at in our meetings is we track the number of students on an intervention and the number of students responding to that intervention. So each of our interventions has like a spreadsheet like this, or it's all on the same spreadsheet, but like a grouping like this. And you can kind of see the number of students that are participating and then our response rate. And again, we're looking for above 70%. So we hit it a couple months, but in general, we're not hitting it consistently. So our team is kind of like, yeah, we probably have a check and check out fidelity issue. So we say we're gonna do the response rate is above 70%, and if so, then we'll analyze some individual student data. And then our goal we set was similar to others I've heard, is that they have to have an average of 80% of their points after at least 6 weeks. So if they meet both of those, someone on the tier 2 team is gonna go into your door and consult with you and say, hey, we're ready to probably fade this intervention, take some pieces down, maybe exit. And then we constantly were getting, whoa, no, don't do that. Because I'm still accommodating for this kid. Are you kidding me? They're so different from other second graders. And we're like, okay, so we thought we had a fidelity issue. Our data is always consistently high. They're getting 97% averages, but the teacher is not ready to let this child fade off. They're not being successful technically. So we're like, okay, we gotta go back to that. So with check and check out fidelity, we were like, how are we going to monitor this? So at first our team was like, yeah, let's do like one of us goes into a classroom and we're going to observe those transitions and that authentic feedback. And we're like, what are we thinking? That's not going to be valid because our presence is going to impact the behavior of this teacher, as well as it's going to feel a little bit evaluative, and they're our colleagues. We don't want to put that pressure on them. Okay, so we're like, well, we got a fidelity checklist. Let's just hand it off to them, and they got to turn it in, and then we'll collect it that way. And we're like, okay, seriously, no, that's not going to work either because, again, if they have to put their name on it and they're turning it in, it's probably not going to be accurate anyways. So we're like, okay, how are we going to do this? And so we found that we were thinking an anonymous self-reflection was our best bet. If we're not collecting usernames in like a Google form, maybe they'll give us some honest answers and we can actually address some of the fidelity issues. So we based a Google form off of this, and then we also added some specifics for our building on there. And we sent it out to our specials teachers, and we sent it out to every classroom teacher who had a student on check and check out. And this is kind of the results. So we heard people are literally saying the 5-to-1 ratio is impossible, can't do it. I also tend to lose the sheet, so I forget to do it, and then I find it at the end of the day, and I quickly fill it out, okay? And then our specials teachers especially, I have to walk the students from this room to this room. That's my transition time, and then I gotta hustle back for the next class. When am I having these conversations? It's like, thank you for your honesty. All right, we kind of assumed this, but then we had the actual like words from the people who were doing it. So what are we going to do about it? So our plan as a secondary systems team with our whole staff is this. So we noticed that, again, we implemented Tier 1 back in 2011, and Tier 2 was 2014. We really don't think people have been trained on check and check out since 2014. So we're like, oh, okay, that's kind of a simple thing. We got to retrain. So our first thing is we got to retrain on what our team does. So in September, we're taking a chunk of the staff meeting, and we're training about our secondary systems team. Who's on it, so you know exactly if you need to consult with someone, who they are, what we do. We're finding that when we say behavior, people are automatically thinking aggression or something really overt and really extreme. And we're trying to like emphasize that, hey, we can help you with those kind of annoying things too. Like that's really what we're looking for, those things that really get on you, and then they kind of exasperate you by the end of the day or by the end of the school week. And then also we want to talk about how they get a child on an intervention. So readdressing that entry criteria and also emphasizing, please enter some data for us, and those kinds of things. So after we do that intro training in September, then in October, we're planning on doing an all-staff check and check out specific training. So again, we're getting to the meat of what the fidelity of check and check out is. And our big thing is really emphasizing that it's not the sheet. That's the intervention. The sheet is the reminder to change the adult behavior. The sheet is my reminder, I need to talk to so-and-so before lunchtime and have that authentic conference with them. And we're gonna really talk about what is authentic feedback? What does that look like? What does it sound like? And hopefully model it for teachers so they can see it and be like, oh yeah, okay, I see that now, and that's how I can stay positive even if it was a rough section, those kinds of things. So we're going to do those two things, and then if a teacher has a child that starts check and check out, what we're hoping to do is kind of create a case manager. And so someone on our team will go to be assigned to that teacher, and then a weekend we're going to have a check-in, a coaching check-in, like, hey, how's it going? Are you finding those times? Let's look at your schedule. Let's see how we can transition and make sure that sheet goes to art class with them and those kinds of things. And then about 3 weeks in, we want to send like that fidelity form again to get some honest feedback. Is it working or not? And what do we need to retrain on, or what do we need to support staff with? So that's with our whole staff. And then as a team, this is something else we're starting in September, is that we kind of expanded our exit criteria to match our entrance criteria a little bit better. So we had the average of 80% or more at least 6 weeks. Now we also want 80% of your days at or above that goal. So we don't want any outliers to be pulling your average. We want you to be consistently doing well. And then also, because of our data being so low, you probably shouldn't be getting written up anymore if our intervention is successful. So we put in that last little bit about no majors, no minors. So that's kind of what we thought. We'll monitor this year, reevaluate, and perhaps change it from there too. So that's what we're up to.
name up so that you can remember where everybody came from. Thank you. All right. So, oh, and we've got a handheld mic. This is just beautiful. We'll just pass it over. So are there any questions off the top of your heads right now in the room? Okay, wow, this is awesome. And did you have some that came through from the CISA sites? Beautiful. Okay, would you mind? Okay.
So in regard to check-in, check-out, what we've dealt with in my school district is how to get kids who don't want to participate in check-in, check-out. What do you do to get them to participate? How do you...
So the question is, how do you, for students that are not likely to participate in check-in, check-out, they don't like it, how do you get them to do it? Does anybody want to field that one?
I have a problem-solving meeting with the student. So it's myself and the student having a problem-solving meeting and just say, you know, like, I notice that you're not wanting to do check-in, check-out. Tell me more about that. And so I just start doing a lot of investigating, like, what is it about check-in, check-out that is causing you some pretty intense feelings that you don't want anything to do with this? And I have, you know, like, I'm here to help you. What do we need to do to help you be able to be successful? Some students are like, I don't like that sheet. And so if it's the sheet, then that's an easy solution. That they don't have to carry that sheet with them wherever they go, but the teacher is constantly going over and giving that student that feedback. And so I really like do student to student.
I think that is the key, is that I know more schools than not these days that are moving towards students don't ever see the sheet. The sheet is the adult responsibility. Melanie said that. And so if I personally would not want to carry around a scarlet letter during my work day, having people evaluate everything that I'm doing, right? And so I think that's one thing to consider. The other fidelity piece that's important to consider is that if you have a large amount of students that are reporting the same thing, not just a one-to-one basis, that's a bigger question about how we're actually setting up the check-in, check-out to begin with. And is it something that kids feel good about? Like, or is it, you know, they should feel good about connecting with a teacher, and why would that not be the case? So high school specific sessions are later throughout the conference too. This
goes along with the not wanting to carry along the sheet or I guess difficulties carrying along sheets for staff and students. Are there schools that are entering directly into like EduClimber and just providing the feedback then, and how is that going for them?
You guys want to, I mean, I would say yes, but.
I know I work at elementary. Kids don't mind the sheet so much. Some of them are proud of it. But I know our secondary teams are definitely feeling that. I know our middle school in Wanakee is dabbling with that, maybe even the intermediate school as well, where they have, like, kids have their devices or they have something and you can directly enter into an app and score right there. It's about reminding teachers to do that. So the sheet was like a physical, like in your face reminder. So I think they're dancing around like how to remind teachers to do that.
Okay, up here.
Could someone speak to, can you hear me? Could someone speak to say groups and kind of differentiating between a say group and a small group counseling, and how many of those kids are on the daily progress report? My question is basically, I see a lot of kids in what I had been calling say groups, and I hadn't been progress monitoring those students through the daily report card, fearing putting too much on teachers, like I see a ton of these students. So can anyone speak to differentiating between those two things?
I think at my school, a say group is like a very specific, working on a certain, like a very specific skill, like something that we really view as a deficit for that student, where our counselor, like the counseling groups are more like families with divorce and things that are maybe a little bit more broad. And typically our counselor tries to work with 3 students or so, and to keep it a really small group and keep it like short and intense, so that she's meeting almost every day with the students for maybe 10, 15 minutes as part of the SAY group, as opposed to maybe some of our other groups where she's meeting every few weeks for half an hour or something like that. So I think that's the difference at Valley View. I don't know about other places.
Talking about the data piece, since that's kind of my wheelhouse. So we've been playing around with some other ways to progress monitor, especially when kids are beyond check and check out. And one of the things that we are dabbling with is what's called direct behavior rating, which is really similar to DPR, sorry, but it's DBR. It's a little bit different where you pick skills-specific things. They're still rated throughout the day, but you're maybe focusing on 1 to 2 things. And it's like a 10-centimeter line, and the teacher kind of guts it on the line throughout the day. There's not as much of the authentic feedback in there, which we need to build in a little bit more, but it's another way to potentially measure if you're not feeling like the daily progress report is meeting your needs.
I think the important thing with any of those interventions is to say 2 things. 1, what are we trying to impact? How are we going to know that it's better? Because we're investing our resources and we want to know that those things are getting better. And the other thing is making it one system of support. Like, hopefully we don't have like a spider leg support system going on. We want one team kind of guiding some of that work, while some of you may have specialized skill to deliver different interventions. We still want one team cohesively planning and guiding that. All right. Yes.
How do you accurately collect data when teachers have different thresholds about when to enter in the information versus handling it themselves and all those things, when everybody's kind of got their own, style of doing that?
Jess, would you mind? I feel like Jess.
So that's absolutely true. And so teachers put in minors and majors, and so they just know that, if you have a different threshold than I have, then you're going to want that check-in, check-out sheet to make sure that you're ensuring that you're going and having that conversation with that student more often than I am. And so that's the beauty of just having data drive what you're doing, because it's different for different teachers, and so they put in minors. Now, if it's a para at recess, and then if the data is showing me that the problem is only at recess, then we're not going to do a general check-in, check-out sheet for that student, because what the data showed me is that it's only at recess. I need to make a recess plan then at that point. And so that's how then it gets into the differences with thresholds of personalities, and how we monitor that.
This doesn't help 100% at all, but it maybe improve, like it helps a little bit. We have just really specific, this is what a minor is in this area, and lots of like very specific details. This is what a major is in this area. And we even, when we first started Universal, created like a whole bunch of note cards and had teachers having conversations in small groups about this behavior. Is this a major or is this a minor? And why do you feel it's a major or a minor? And then we kind of created those guiding documents in that system kind of based on feedback from staff. And again, it doesn't at all completely resolve it, but it kind of helps when people are all we've had conversations about it and some of those things are laid out.
And it goes to the professional learning and calibration that Melanie mentioned as well, that like it's an ongoing conversation about how we are kind of learning together and using different tools and strategies in a similar fashion. Michelle, is there anything from CISA yet? Okay, all right, then I'm just gonna go in the back. All right, okay, perfect.
We have been doing tier 2 for 6 years, and we were around once a week. And we're having a difficult time when we talk about fading. Kindergarten, we're taking it away and giving them the autonomy to rate themselves. It's more difficult when they're smaller. And I was just wondering, we're kind of bouncing ideas off of what maybe you at the elementary level do for that fading for the small kids.
So fading and differentiation for different grade levels.
Because when they have to self-evaluate themselves, it's difficult, especially if they're on check-in and check-out early in the year and really don't even have that rapport built with them as much as you.
I will say, for that age of student, we rarely have them self-monitor completely. We change our questions during the authentic feedback sessions, where the teacher, instead of kind of reporting how they saw it, they prompt some more open-ended questions. and get it from there and then rate from there. But yeah, I've only found that to be super successful later in kindergarten. So I hear you.
We do the same thing. We don't start that until first grade. And I didn't really mention that. That is very much so how we begin fading. As our goal of check and check out, we always tell teachers, is that students can recognize the behaviors that are successful and not successful on their own. So we have the self-rating, but we don't start until first grade. One thing too that's helpful is having then those students who are fading begin to mentor another student who's just starting check and check out. We've had a lot of success with that as well, because then they kind of get that feeling of helping someone else, or like they're doing something good for the school, and that's been really beneficial as well. Sometimes it might be a first grade student helping another first grade student. With kindergarten though, again, it's hard unless there happens to be another kindergarten student who's starting at the same time.
And for our K students and first grade also, we do like they no longer have their check and check out mentor, but they're still having their teacher be their check and check out mentor, and they still have their DPR. And so we do it for it's just the teacher and the K student checking in and checking out together all day long using that same DPR. For the first week, it's all 5 days. The second week, we go down to 4 days. The third week, we go down to 3, and we just keep yes.
All right, gentleman in the front, you had a question.
Yeah, so the self-monitoring. Can you get him like?
Yep. Yep. I can repeat it too.
So Andrew, you talked about in your presentation about questions about why students didn't get their points. So they're self-monitoring or tracking, and then is that the teachers bringing that folder or portfolio in on the student to talk about points, or can you talk about that?
Mm-hmm. So what we do is the student at the end of the time period when the teacher would typically be meeting with the student to have the conversations about how the last hour or so whatever went, the student fills out the sheet, and then they still sit down and have that conversation about how it went. And then sometimes oftentimes the student is more difficult on themselves or harder on themselves than the teacher would be, or sometimes it's the other way around, and the students we talk about when they start their self-monitoring that they both have to agree to it, the teacher and the student, and there may be times where they might have to have more conversations about that, but they continue to fill out the sheet, and then they bring it to the check and check out buddy. They continue to do that even when they're self-monitoring. So that's how we get the data.
I think we have time for one or two other ones. Yes. I'm going to give you the mic so that everybody can hear you.
Do you have a time when you reset like the major minor, like at quarter, or does EduClimber just automatically do a 12-week span or a 6-week span? Or
Thank you for asking that. We have it reset at we're on trimesters, so we reset ours at trimesters. But there's a key to that. You really still have to monitor that data right after, because what if that student, like for us it's 5 minors or 3 majors, what if they had 2 majors and then they get that 3rd major a week after the trimester? So that is part of my job too, is monitoring that. But yes, we definitely reset that. So it's not like they had a major in October, a major in December, and so thank you for asking that.
So speaking to that, we don't reset it in EduClimber, it automatically keeps going. But if we're finding for our 2 minors, for example, that one happened in September and one is happening in April, then usually we don't automatically put them on check and check out. We consult with the teacher and say, hey, we noticed that this kid did meet our threshold, but they're really separate, or they're really separate incidents too. So we monitor that a little bit and have some flexibility, especially when it gets to the end of the year.
And ours is a rolling 6 weeks so every night at like 1 in the morning or whatever, like you said, it looks at from today, 6 weeks beforehand, did this student meet the threshold? And so it never resets, it just is constantly rolling from this day, looking back 6 weeks.
All right, we have time for one more. Last question.
I'm a coach in my building, and we're working on making our systems just more fluid. So if we want a student to use check-in, check-out, the teacher says, okay, yep, they're going to do check-in, check-out. They call the parents, and we go forward. One of the things that I was hearing you say, Jessica, is that you're catching those things, those data points coming in through EduClimber, and then you go and have that conversation. Have you found that more successful by having one person kind of manning that data and getting everything going versus having the teachers manning that data? Does that make sense, my question?
Yeah, and I think that's where we're able to also ensure that fidelity, because that was a big piece for us, is that we want to make sure it's the same message for all students, regardless of who that teacher is. And we're humans, so everybody takes it differently. So most definitely, that's been a big piece for us, is that for the most part, it's myself. Sometimes it's the guidance counselor or the school psych, but for the most part, it's me, so that it's that consistent message to all students.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Can you just give one last round of applause to these guys? They are fantastic.